are for another 2 chapters of Nothing's Ever Easy. We're going to do chapters 29 and 30 today. So we're getting close to the end. There are 41 or 42 chapters. 42 chapters. So we are getting there. All right, let's get started with chapter 29. Stella grinned. Excellently done. You should put all this down on paper when we get out of here. I liked hearing a when and not an if, even as I laughed. Jay's handwriting's atrocious, and I'm not writing down both parts. I'll bribe Dunk. With what? I shot. A strip show? Dave started giggling. Jay blushed. Jez, he whined. That was uncalled for. Stella chuckled too. Aw, Jay, I'm sure Duncan wouldn't want that. He's merely a friend, he sputtered. You said he had a crush on another freedom fighter. So he's taken too, she continued sweetly. I held my stomach, unable to stop laughing. Oh, God's breath. Jay, though, grinned around bright red cheeks. Okay, point. The next week passed quietly. Jay got called in to talk to Rees again, but either Colonel's heart wasn't in it, or he felt generous, because my friend came back relatively unscathed. Certainly not like the time before. Other than that, we exchanged stories unrelated to our plight, and also discussed what would need to be done, assuming the freedom fighters won, to put Tira back to rights. For whatever reason, Rees waited an extra day before sending the goons in Dayton for me. I expected to be taken to the same small room he'd used previously, but instead they steered me right past the door and back towards his office. My stomach sank. I was not ready to face Vladimir Oplin again, especially not on my own. When Dayton opened the door, though, I breathed a sigh of relief. The only person inside was Rees, seated at his desk, leaning back in his chair, which was half turned to the window. Good morning, Jez, he said, without looking away from the window. Morning, Trigger, I replied cheerfully, because I had to. He didn't reply, continuing to stare out the window. Considering I was looking out at an alley between the jail and the next building, I wasn't sure what he could possibly find so interesting. But I let the silence build. It was no skin off my back, literally or figuratively, if we delayed our little chat. Finally, Kilgore spoke. Sir? I started. It was only the second or third time I'd heard either of them speak. Deciding I should really start the meeting out on the right foot, I asked about it. The brutes rumbled, like growling dogs. Rees's head came up, though. No, Kilgore, Juke. In fact, let go of her. Both looked taken aback by the order. You heard the man, I said, tugging at my arms. That's an order, Rees said, and shot me a quelling look that I ignored. They released their grips on my shoulders uneasily and stepped back. Jez, sit down, Rees ordered, gesturing at the chair across from him. I slid forward and perched on the edge, much to his amusement. It won't bite. I know that, I said, and made myself settle back, even if it put me at a disadvantage if the brutes came after me. Neither will I. Good to know. I don't like mixing my blood in someone's spit, I said sarcastically. He smiled slightly and straightened a stack of papers, setting it back down deliberately and pulling off the top paper off. I thought you might be interested in a piece of juicy gossip that you've probably missed, being all tucked away. Oh? Rainier Highcastle is alive. What? I sputtered before I could control myself. I knew that Rainier was alive, obviously, thanks to Jackson and his letter, but it was about the last thing I had expected to come out of Rees's mouth. My mind rolled back over his last words. If it was juicy gossip that leaned towards the fact it was public knowledge, why wait almost 2 years and let everyone know? What game were they playing here? The prince, or should I say king, is alive and well, Rees continued, his voice calm and calculating as he watched me. Not only that, but he announced his engagement to marry Anika Oplin. The wedding will be in just a few weeks. Marry Anika, I echoed. That part was a surprise, but the reasoning hit me almost immediately. That's why he's still alive, isn't it? He was always very popular. If he marries one of the three, it gives them a legitimacy they wouldn't otherwise have. It also lends a stability to the throne as well, since none of them have officially taken it. I nodded. And they would have had him make the announcement himself, too, didn't they? He grinned. Yes. My, you are quick, Jez. I rolled my eyes. As always, your compliments warm my heart. Yes, they had him do it. Let him stand up there all by himself. I hate to say it, but sometimes they are brilliant. It's rare, but it happens. Was that Dagmar's idea? Does it matter? I suppose not, other than to satisfy my curiosity. Oplin hadn't struck me as that kind of smart. Although, I'm sure they would appreciate the compliment in turn. I let out a laugh. I sincerely doubt that after the other day, but please, pass it along with my greetings. He smirked and leaned back in his chair, putting his feet on the desk. He obviously thought me no threat with the brute still in the room. I would have thought our first meeting might have taught him better than that, unless he was going to drop another bombshell. You are one curious woman. I blinked. Not what I was expecting again. Thank you? His smile widened. We tried to kill you by blowing you up, yet you somehow survived. I didn't appreciate the reminder. And now our soldiers have undoubtedly had run-ins with you upwards of a dozen times, and you're still not only kicking, but in one piece, relatively speaking. I didn't appreciate that one either. I know how to swing a sword. He snorted. I don't think that's all it is. Who was Brighton? I had to give him credit, because the question did take me off guard, but probably not in the way he intended. It threw me right out of the conversation. Do you really expect me to answer that? He shrugged. It's worth a try. Why not tell me? Any reason to keep you from being smug is enough. I'll be smug anyway. It comes naturally. Who was he? I told you already. He meant something serious to you, didn't he? He was a very good friend. All my friends mean something to me, I retorted. Look, we both know I'm not going to willingly hand over personal information, so either let me go back to the cell, or let's move on. He studied me in silence. I had to wonder what and who exactly he saw. Your family. What about them? You said they don't know about you. Do they know about Colin? I frowned, freshly on my guard. What about Colin? It occurred to me suddenly that considering it was the three who invaded Northwind, Rees might actually know what had happened to my brother. When was the last time you saw him? This seemed like a quick trick question somehow, but I couldn't see it, so I answered honestly, wondering if I could get some sort of confirmation. Years ago, when he left for Northwind and I went to Elworth. Rees's eyebrows went way up. That seems like a strange thing to pick to lie about. I searched his face. It's not a lie, I said flatly. Colin was in Northwind as part of the family guard when your bosses sent people in to kill the Walters family. If you're asking me about him, then you know this. I wanted to ask, but was pretty sure Rees would give me a taste of my own medicine. If only I could see what he was getting at. He seemed to sense that, because he nodded, a slight smirk on his face, even if something in his gaze seemed puzzled. Very well. Kill her, Juke. Take her back to her cell, please. Gently. I don't want to have to call the doctor again. As we walked back, I tried to do some mental math. We had probably been there 20 or so days. Was that long enough for Jessie and Rye to arrive? I couldn't remember exactly what the plan had been, but I needed out. Something about his interest in Colin had set off an itch in the back of my brain. Then I realized, during our other conversation, when he threatened my family, he'd very definitely said 3 brothers at home. Not 3 brothers alive or 3 brothers left, but 3 at home. That monster definitely knew something about Colin, and now he knew I didn't know whatever it was. Once Dayton let me back into the cell and disappeared down the corridor, I turned to Jay. Remember how I told you I was going to stand on your shoulders one day to look out the window? Yes? Come on, I want to see. Now? But you haven't even said what happened. Nothing happened that can't wait, I said with a dismissive hand wave, even though that wasn't true, but I needed another minute. Please? He sighed. You only need to sit on my shoulders. It took a little doing, and in the end Stella gave me a boost, but I managed to perch on his shoulders. I'd plainly never appreciated Jay's strength enough, because he managed to keep upright, and I wasn't small or light. I peered out, my eyes slowly adjusting to the brighter light. What do you see? Feet? Lots of feet. Big feet, small feet, feet with... Jez, are you getting poetic over feet? Is there something wrong with it? Other than it being undeniably strange? You're one to talk, I said, basking in the view of the sun. It had to be edging closer to noon than I thought, from its height in the sky. I could sense him rolling his eyes. Okay, time for you to get down. We managed it semi-gracefully. I didn't kick him in the face or fall, so I considered it a win. He peeked up, craning to see out the window. Think you could return the favor? I grinned. Maybe Stella and I together. I don't know how you managed me. Muscles, he said solemnly. But you do weigh a ton. Muscles, I retorted. His lips twitched in a grin before he could squash it. My shoulders will never be the same. Your fault for letting me up. Stella chuckled and patted the ground in front of her. Sit, and I'll give you a massage. In about a second, he was seated cross-legged in front of her, giving me a smug look. I shook my head, but Stella seemed well aware of his tricks and also didn't seem to mind. Far be it for me to intervene. So, Jay said, a look of bliss on his face as Stella started massaging his shoulders, you came back awfully quickly. You owe us an explanation. We just talked, I said, still puzzling over the meeting, pushing the last of it aside for a moment. It didn't make sense to me that he'd hand me the information about the prince or king, technically since he was right, and not press harder for something in return. And, he prompted impatiently, well, it's now public knowledge that Rainier is alive. It's also public knowledge that he's engaged to Nika Oplin and their wedding is fast approaching. You're kidding, Stella burst, hand pausing. Dave stared at me in shock. Jay, though, nodded thoughtfully after the initial surprise. Makes sense. Everyone loved Rainier before the takeover. They'll love him just as much now. It adds to their hold on the throne. Puppet King. And Queen, if Jackson McRose is at all to be believed, I said. God's breath, Stella murmured. Can't decide if this is bad news or good news. Good, still, I think, until we can get an accurate view of Rainier's state of mind. Jay scratched his chin. I'll buy that. Anything else we should know? He asked about Bry again. He insisted he was something special to me. Considering you screamed his name as you attempted to both throttle him and bash his head into a hard floor, I would say that would be a logical and reasonable conclusion, Jay said. But why does he keep asking? Dave asked curiously. It's a trigger, Stella said. Since she originally said it in a time of very high emotion, he wants to try to use it to try and throw her off her game, then use the momentum to get an answer to another less emotional question. He didn't really. He didn't get any information out of asking. I frowned and ran over the conversation in my head. Oh, damn, he did. I didn't even register giving him anything at the time, but I told him he was a very good friend, which he could probably guess, and that all my friends mean something to me. It's not much, but it was a subtle probe at my defenses. See? And now he knows that next time, maybe he can get something more important out of you, while you're all riled up about Bry. I'll try and be careful. Where'd you pick that up? Jay asked. Nothing personal, but it doesn't strike me as the normal thing you'd learn on the farm. Stella reddened, patting his shoulder to indicate she was done with the massage. George was already into politics, and I picked up a lot along the way, she admitted, and he gained a probably unhealthy obsession with interrogation methods after he joined the Freedom Fighters. How many of those interesting tidbits did you pick up? I asked. Quite a few, she told me. George liked to talk about it, and I was the easy, accessible one. Plus, I don't mind. It's strangely fascinating and an interesting look into how the brain works. I wondered how we could use this to our advantage. If nothing else, I'd be more on my guard than ever. Would you mind teaching us? It might make the difference in dealing with Rees in the future. Of course. I'm not sure it'll be any help, she said modestly. Every little thing helps when it comes to a man like Rees, Jay said, shifting around to sit next to her. Okay, let's see, she said, leaning back thoughtfully. Then she launched into a lesson. I listened closely, hoping to pick up some tips. I didn't mind that the topic had moved down without me mentioning Colin. I wanted a bit more time to mull that one over. Jessica Ryder offered her fake papers to the guards at the gates of Greensward. After the explosions that had sent the city to its knees 3 weeks before, security had been tighter than ever. No one in or out without identifying papers. Jessie's contained the innocuous name of Jessica Smith, although she suspected she could have used her real name just as effectively. Bo had not wanted to take that risk, though, which is why she and Rye were coming in separately. The irony of it all was that once someone was within the gates, most of the eyes were off. It was like they thought they could spot a freedom fighter by a guilty expression or something equally obvious. Of course, not a single freedom fighter felt the least bit guilty about what they were doing. She smiled blandly and answered the basic questions about the purpose for her visit and where she'd be staying. She lied, the guard stamped her paper, and she strode into the city. Although she'd been able to come in with only a knife, there would be more supplies stashed at an anonymous safe house so she wouldn't feel so naked. Taking a moment to orient herself off the map she had studied, Jessie turned and headed for the prison. As she walked, she casually observed the city, taking in the heavy presence of soldiers and how the common folks made fairly wide circuits to stay away from them. The tension was so thick it prickled at her skin like lightning. She rubbed her arms and gave the soldiers a wide berth, too. There was no point attracting trouble. It took over an hour to work her way through the city to near the palace and garrison. She didn't pause to take in Jez and Jay's handiwork, although she did whistle under her breath. Despite getting caught, they had done their job very well. The building was leveled. Jessie grinned to herself. Soon enough, a few more would be flattened as well, and Greensward all but neutralized. The city, as Tira's second largest and being only a half-day's ride from Oakbridge, comprised the largest threat to a direct assault on Oakbridge. The last thing they needed was to be in the midst of battling for Oakbridge and have a whole host of additional soldiers riding up. Thus, Bo, with the help of their informant Call, as well as Adam and Ursula, who had sent word of Jez and Jay's capture, they'd come up with this new plan. The original had been for Adam and Ursula to lead on this bit, to let them finally get their share of the fun, but when Jackson McRose had turned up with a letter for Bo from his alive older brother, plans had understandably changed. Now, Jessie and Rye were on their own, although the other pair had done a lot of legwork for them, such as stashing extra weapons and explosives. Cal, although always secretive, had consented to be a backup in case of emergency. Jessie moved on, eyeing the prison out of the corner of her eye as she passed. It was a squat, ugly building, built practically. It rose a little over a story high because of small, thickly barred windows rested at street level. Jessie made note of that ridiculousness. Perhaps she could figure out which window might belong to her friends. Still, they needed to know the layout of the prison first, and there was a good chance they weren't being kept in one of the windowed cells. If the three had gathered any intelligence on them in the past 3 weeks, they wouldn't be that stupid. Although... She shrugged and drew her eyes away. The soldiers were so thick here she didn't dare linger. Jessie turned her attention to finding a place of lodging. Not 5 blocks from the prison, she found a nice, well-kept inn, 3 stories tall. It was large enough that they could blend in, but close enough to be effective for what they wanted on both ends of their job. Tilting her head back, she glanced at the sign. A recently painted wooden plaque proclaimed it the Blue Parrot Inn, featuring a bright blue bird below the name. Jessie snorted. Parrots weren't even native to the region. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, blinking to adjust to the dark interior after the bright sunlight. Her eyes raked the common room. There weren't many patrons so early in the day, but all those present were male and soldiers. She supposed there was something to be said about operating right under their noses. She strolled to the bar, which was manned by a woman about Jessie's age at first glance. Despite the hour, the woman already looked wrung out. She summoned a smile for Jessie, though. "Can I help you, miss?" "I'm hoping you can. I'm looking to book a room for at least the next 2 weeks, and maybe as long as a month." "We can probably do that. Any requirements?" "2 beds, if at all possible. We can do without if necessary." Beds at all were a luxury Jessie hadn't had in a while. Not since West Corner. Before that, she couldn't remember. Maybe Cole? The woman turned away, scanning a chalkboard tacked on the wall behind the bar. Room 205 would work perfectly. It's upstairs, so it won't be in the path of most of the soldiers. Sounds great. What do I owe you? We'll take it week by week, so I'll need a week's now. The woman pointed at the board, listing the prices. Jessie glanced at it because she gave her the exact amount, and it would have been suspicious if she didn't, but knew she had the coin. No problem. She counted out the pieces, and the woman swept them off the bar, making them disappear. And the names of the people staying, she said, pulling out a piece of chalk. Jessica and Ryan Smith. My younger sister wanted to do some sightseeing and left me to do the practical she said lightly. The woman grinned. Being a younger sister myself, I totally understand. I'm Kira, she said, offering her hand. Jessie liked her instinctively, but she cautioned herself that Kira worked in the most heavily guarded area of Tira besides Oakbridge Castle, so she would still need to watch her words. Nice to meet you. If you need anything, just yell. We're a little short-staffed, so it's really just me and the boss, Jacob. We have one part-timer named Caroline, and she's very capable too, but never on when one of us isn't. Don't worry, Ryan and I are easy to please, she told her with a smile. Kira plunked 2 keys down on the counter. Glad to hear it. This lot can be a bear. She added the last bit louder, and the soldiers of the bar all laughed and shot varying degrees of good-natured retorts at the woman. She grinned, plainly unconcerned, winked at Jessie, and bounded off to fill drinks. Jessie shook her head, amused, and hiked up the flight of stairs to their room. Before she entered, she wandered the length of the L-shaped hall. The staircase up from the bar room connected at one corner of the L. One way went to the front of the building. The other ended in a large window, and when Jessie peeked out, a fire escape that wound both to the ground floor and up to the roof. When she checked her room number again, 205 was one of the last rooms in that section of hall, with an easy escape route should it come to that. Eyes narrowing, Jessie glanced over her shoulder, back towards the stair. Was it just that the soldiers had been giving unaccompanied women a hard time? Or had Kira somehow surmised more than that? She snorted. Maybe freedom fighters did have a look about them, and the guards at the gate had just been too stupid to notice. Either way, she didn't think Kira would be a threat. If she'd wanted to, she could have called the guards down on Jessie immediately, or certainly given her a less easily escaped room. She shrugged and let herself in. It was a medium-sized room, and nicely appointed, with a chair in one corner and bureau in the other near the door. The far end of the room contained 2 beds with a small table between them, perfectly adequate for their uses. She slung her bag onto one of the beds and pushed open the window, peering out. Without too much effort, they could probably even reach the fire escape from this window. She grinned and left it open to get a little fresh air despite the winter chill. Then she went back to the hall, locking the door and heading downstairs. She returned Kira's wave and headed for the rendezvous point with Rye. Her first job had been to locate the safe houses and make sure they were all still safe, or at least appeared that way. When Jessie reached the market square, which was still bustling even on a non-market day, she spotted Rye from some distance. Her friend stood on the edge of a fountain. Both waved at almost the same time. Rye knew her intention to find lodgings near the prison, so she'd obviously been watching that direction. The other woman hopped down, disappearing into the sea of people, but they met halfway across the square. Any problems? Jessie asked. Nope. For all the hype about security, the guards could have given a shit. Guess I don't look like much of a threat. Little do they know, she said amused, deliberately tousling Rye's hair like an older sister might. Don't make that a habit, please, Rye said, with a foul look as she patted it back down. Whatever you say. I've officially surpassed you at hand-to-hand, and don't you forget it. I wouldn't dream of it, Jessie said, grinning, feeling more secure with her friend there. Although she felt perfectly confident no one had given her a second glance earlier, it was nice to have backup at hand. Find us a room? Yep, 5 blocks away. Closest place that didn't look like a dive. Fair enough. Plenty close. And numbers? Heavy, both near and at the inn, but doable. There are some holes already. How about the houses? Don't seem to be watched. Rye shrugged. But I only did a quick sweep. Jessie nodded and turned the conversation to what sounded like innocuous topics, like the state of Greensward. Rye had noticed the same tension and the wide berth given the soldiers. I wonder if there have been riots. I'll ask Kira if I can get a good opening, she said, and explained who Kira was just as they reached the inn. Really? Blue parrots? She shrugged. I heard they can be. Who am I to question inn names? Maybe the original owner, was from really far south and had seen them, or had one as a pet. Can we ask Kira that too? Rye asked, amused. I'm not sure she'll know, but I don't see why not. Kira was busy with the lunch crowd, mostly soldiers, although a few people not in uniform were present too, so Jessie just waved again and led Rye upstairs to their room, showing her the fire escape and admitting her thoughts about Kira and their room placement. Rye shrugged. If she suspects something and isn't on our side, she would have just sent that group of soldiers pouncing, since we're both here. So she either doesn't suspect anything, or she's a sympathizer, and that might work in our favor. She made a good point, so Jessie nodded and sat on her bed. Rye tossed her stuff on the chair and flopped on hers. Then, the two shared, in more detail, what they'd seen on their separate mini-missions. It did sound like the safe houses hadn't been compromised, which was a very good thing, since the supplies they contained were critical to their mission's success. Then talk turned to what came next. Tonight, we'll both scout out the palace. Tomorrow, we'll split. One of us takes the safe houses, the other the jail and the palaces, so we don't want to linger at either too long. I'll take the safe houses for the first day, Rees said. I've already been to them, and I'm better at spotting lurkers than you are. Would you stop rubbing in all the things you're better than me at? The 17-year-old grinned. But it's so much fun. Jessie threw her pillow half-heartedly at her. God's breath, you are such a baby. I know, my youth works in my favor. Well, now that I am and look older than 16, so I can leave Cavern Hall without people thinking I should be in school. You still could be. I'm 17 and a half. I could have been out of school over a year ago, which is why Iris's rules that it's until 18 are dumb. Jessie smiled at the old complaint. As you said, you're 17 and a half, and if Beau's plan goes off as planned, we'll have taken back Tira by the time you're 18. Then you can do whatever you want. And in the meantime, we get to make things go boom, she said with a wide grin. Okay, that's enough of that already. Jay did that constantly for a week. I don't need you to start. But there is something supremely satisfying about it, Roy protested. You should try it. Jessie rolled her eyes. Come on, let's go get lunch. Sorin tapped his finger on the desk as he leaned against it, listening to Vladimir grill poor Cal up. It's going to be a quiet affair. I realize that people want to see it, but now's not the time for a massive public wedding. Too many things could go wrong. It'd be like asking for the freedom fighters to crash it. Sorin debated mentioning that it would be nice for Ren to have his brother attend, but knew that Vladimir would react terribly. Yes, sir, Caleb said crisply. Any other requirements, sir? We'll need to eventually parade the newlyweds in front of the masses, so that will have to be carefully planned and set up, but the information needs to not be linked too soon. And who will be invited to the wedding proper, sir? Caleb asked, taking industrious notes. Sorin wasn't sure why, since Vladimir's instructions weren't particularly difficult. Still, he supposed considering the mercurial mood his brother had been in recently, it was in Caleb's best interest to make sure he didn't miss a thing. Any dignitaries and noblemen who can get away. No representatives from Alia or Neris. I don't want them creating any more trouble than we already have. Plus, any ranking officials who are free. And Jackson. Anika would be upset if he wasn't there. Anyone else, Sorin? Having half-tuned him out, Sorin was mildly surprised to be addressed. Oh, you know best, he said mildly. But I know Rees has his hands full right now, so I doubt he'll be here. How do you know that? His brother snapped, probably more annoyed by the first part than the information about Rees. He sent a note up yesterday. Didn't you read it? He asked innocently. Why? Why is he going to be busy? I don't know. He didn't say. Although I have to assume it's the prisoners and his continued efforts to replace the buildings and supplies they blew up. I, of course, sent a return message asking for more detailed report. Vladimir grunted. Those kind of people, Caleb. Yes, sir. Is there anything else you need right now, or may I go ahead and get started on this? Vladimir waved a hand, and Caleb hurried from the room, quietly shutting the door behind him. Where were you earlier, when I was looking for you? Contrary to what you may believe, brother, it's not my job to always be at your beck and call. The guard at Rainier's room said you'd taken him somewhere. Then you know where I was earlier today, so why bother asking? When I couldn't find you in your office or rooms, I thought perhaps you'd gone to speak to Rainier. It is not... Don't even say safe, Sorin said, his own anger starting to shimmer before he pushed it away. Ren is not a docile pet, but he's also on crutches, thanks to you, and can move only at a snail's pace. I'm also perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Ren is no threat to me or to our sister. We have been through this. As Vladimir stared at him, Sorin thought maybe he'd caught the omission of his name. Where did you go? For a walk along the ramparts, and then escorted through Oakbridge via some of the safe but less traveled back roads. Instantly, his brother's face went stormy. Don't, Sorin said again, cutting him off. They will get suspicious if we keep him cooped up in here. Ren was never like that before, and it's already been 2 years. We can play the illness card only so far. He was gracious and perfectly well behaved, not even edging the line. In fact, Ren's behavior had surprised Sorin a little. It seemed he trusted the freedom fighters to do their self-appointed job and get him out. Vladimir waved him off, much like he's had for Caleb. Fine, he said, turning away. Sorin watched him, fighting with himself over whether or not it was worth it to say something. Vlad, Annie and I are worried about you, he said finally, trying to keep his voice gentle. Why? His brother turned to face him again. He was fairly certain that should have been painfully obvious, but at least Vladimir was listening again, even if he'd pushed Sorin off the last couple times. Because you're stressed. You're quick to anger and not as collected as you usually are. You made Annie cry not too long ago, in case you don't recall. He scowled. I had not forgotten, he said stiffly. You're the collected one, Sorin, not me. In an entirely different way, he protested. You know what I mean. Do not push me. I'm fine. Now, he said, are Anika and Rainier working out the details on their end? The lack of nicknames for both of them bothered Sorin more than the subject change. The three of them had always been notoriously bad at feelings and sharing them. I think so. I know they did a bunch yesterday to get it done and over with. Good. With that, Vladimir swept out of the office. His office, leaving Sorin staring after him. Sorin ran a hand through his hair. What concerned him most was that his brother didn't seem to even notice that his behavior had changed, that things were not good, that he was becoming what they all hated more than anything. Sorin felt certain he did not have the control not to go too far. Chapter 30. Despite Stella's advice and the interesting tidbits, the day dragged. Finally, our dinner arrived. All of us but Jay stared at it. I was heartily sick of the same old thing. It seemed Dave felt similarly as he sloshed around his bowl before sighing. Don't suppose we could ask for something else, do you? It is rather plain. The same bland stew with drops of meat. At least it was consistently warm. It's not like we're exactly in a position to complain and expect them to listen, though. Maybe not, but here's what you do, Jay said, leaning forward as if to invite us in on a secret. He'd scraped his bowl clean already. I found myself leaning in as well, curious where he was going with this. You think about food. Oh, here we go again, I muttered. If he caught it, he didn't acknowledge it. This is food, Dave said, pointing at it. It's the same thing we've eaten every night for weeks, so I don't want to think about it. Jay sighed impatiently, like we were incapable of keeping up with his genius. I was incapable of keeping up sometimes, but it had nothing to do with him being a genius. I meant good food, bacon and steak and vegetables, or the entire cow. I started laughing. You wouldn't know what to do with the entire cow. I would too. I'd eat it all, he said with relish. Oh, all of it, including the skin and hooves, and do not ruin my fantasy, Jasmine, he said grumpily. I would butcher it first. Or, get someone else to butcher it for me. Do you know how? Dave asked, curious. It's been a while, but yes, I probably could. I just don't particularly enjoy it. It's kind of icky. Stella snorted. I remember they'd both grown up on a farm. I've never done a cow, but I'd helped with the pigs. George let me last year, Dave said. Really? Is that a normal age to start helping? Sometimes having grown up in privilege did make me feel a little disconnected from the other freedom fighters, but mostly for things like how to slaughter an animal. I'd watched it a couple of times as a child out of curiosity and because my brothers were fascinated. It's not unusual, Stella said. George and I both started when we were a little older, but that's only because our father had more relatives nearby to help and didn't need us. With Frank dead too, it was really just the three of us and a couple part-time farmhands. Dave nodded eagerly. One of the ways I could help most was being an extra set of hands. Then he sighed. I miss the farm. What do you think happened to the animals and everything, Stella? He probably missed a lot more than that, but I could see where it felt safer to talk about the farm. I'm sure our neighbors are taking care of them, Stella said. That was if the soldiers hadn't taken them as payment. From the look on her face, which she quickly tried to hide, Stella felt the same way. She put an arm around the boy. We can start a new farm when this is all over, she said, optimistically. Okay. I felt a little like I was intruding, so glanced at Jay. He looked like maybe he could handle taking up farming if need be. When he caught me watching, he blushed and looked away. I grinned. Where are you going to live when it's all over? Dave asked. I blinked, then shrugged. I hadn't thought about it much. Even once we win, there'll still be a lot of work to do, and I'm sure I can help somewhere, so I'll probably stay at the castle. She says work, yet I hear Bo, Jay said, in a stage whisper. I punched him. He rubbed his arm, but didn't complain, satisfied that he'd won that round. I silently conceded that he had. I had no intention of living away from Bo, and as the prince and second in line for the throne, I doubted he would be living anywhere else. What about you, Jay? I was figuring Oakbridge too, at least for a while. Can't let Jez and the others have all the fun running the country without me. Dave looked caught in indecision. He glanced up at Stella. Maybe, he said slyly, we could live there too, instead of starting a new farm. Considering I'd already talked to her about it, I knew how Stella felt. I kept from smiling, but barely. I don't see why not. The castle in Oakbridge is huge, I confided. I had visited a handful of times as a child. Would we really live there? In a castle? He grinned. That sounds awesome. Let's do that, Stella. She laughed, ruffling his hair. Let's leave our options open for now, she said, but caught Jay's eye. Who will be in charge after all of you get really old? We'll have kids who can take over, Jay said, who you can babysit when they're small. Dave made a face. Why would I want to do that? Little kids are icky. I laughed. By the time there are little kids running around, you might not think so anymore. Which, the idea of you with kids, Jay, is frightening at best. He grinned. No little Jays? Gods, no, I said. I like the idea, Stella said, reddening. Well, Jay's practically a kid himself still, so he'd certainly understand them, I said brightly. Jay opened his mouth to protest, then shut it again. I grinned at him. Can't argue with that, can you? Shush, he told me, and turned righteously back to Stella and Dave. I don't think we've ever asked. How old are you two? I'm 10, he said proudly, confirming my suspicions. Stella smiled fondly. Double digits already on me. Makes me feel old. You are old, he said with a smirk. She poked him in the side. I'm 19. I gather you two are both 20 from the story. Yep, but Jess is still younger than me and a baby. I rolled my eyes. That was not an argument worth engaging in for long, but I had to, however briefly. I'm only a couple months younger than you. So, that still qualifies as a baby to me. I decided that the best response to that was to ignore him. That didn't last long, but at least by the time the conversation had started back up, he'd gotten off that topic. Jessie and Rye headed downstairs. The main lunch rush appeared to be over, so they grabbed spots at the bar. A small cluster of soldiers sat at the far end, and one single well-kept man sat 3 stools down. Kira came their way as soon as she finished serving drinks to the crowd at the end. What can I get you two? She said with a smile, shaking Rye's hand. Glass of water and a house special, Jessie said after perusing the board behind the bar. Same. Kira moved off towards the kitchen. New in town? It was the man 3 stools down. Jessie looked up. Yes, we're thinking about making the move to a big city. We're spending some time here and in Oakbridge before deciding. Ah, that's a good idea. Where are you from? Up near Elworth, Rye said, which was true enough these days, considering Cavern Hall sat a little ways north of the town. Pretty area, he said. I've been up there a time or two, but unfortunately couldn't stay long. Kira returned with their water. Colonel Rees, are you sure you don't want anything else? The waitress asked as she passed him. He turned to her, and Jessie and Rye exchanged a very quick glance. And Kira dropped the name and title on purpose to warn them? It certainly seemed that way, but it had been done so naturally the Colonel shouldn't suspect a thing. Jessie knew the name, too. Colonel Rees was nominally in charge of Greensward, although he'd been active less recently. No, I'm fine. Thank you, Kira, he said politely before turning back to them. So how long are you planning on enjoying Greensward? Are you staying here at the Parrot? We're thinking about a month, all told, but 2 weeks for sure, Jessie said. A month, he said, obviously feigning surprise. I didn't realize the Elworth area was that prosperous. Excuse me? Rye said carefully. I didn't realize the salaries in that area were high enough to support 2 people for a month here in the city, and presumably another month in Oakbridge. We saved for a while, sir, Jessie said, and with our parents dead, we have nothing to hold us there. We also figured we could pick up the odd job here and there to make a little more. Colonel Rees, Kira interrupted sharply before I could reply. She looked annoyed. We've told you before that Jacob would appreciate it if you didn't interrogate our customers. We've lost more than one regular because of that habit. My apologies, Kira, but it's a habit that's hard to break. I applaud your choice of words, though. It's no secret your job over at the jail, she said a touch sourly. There's still no reason to pester our innocent patrons, though. Guess it's a good thing we have nothing to hide, Jessie said lightly, not wanting Kira to get in trouble on their account. She did file the information away. Sounded like Rees was maybe the head of the jail, which meant he was the one they were directly looking to cross by rescuing their friends. Rees smiled, but the expression sent a shiver inching down Jessie's spine. She barely managed to hide it. See, Kira, nothing to worry about. Are you 2 siblings? Half-sisters, Rye said, but we've always lived together. They decided a half-sister's backstory made more sense, since they didn't really look related. So we're more like full siblings, Jessie said brightly. I wouldn't want anyone else. He smiled slightly. Siblings are a wonderful thing. Where are you thinking about getting work? We haven't even been here a day, sir. We haven't exactly gotten that far, Rye said. Kira returned with 2 heaping plates of food. We could use the help around here. Winter's our busy season, what with all the soldiers all cooped up here due to bad weather. A month would get us out of the busiest part of the season. We'd be heading towards the thaw. Can we talk about it? Let you know tomorrow. Of course, Jacob will be in then too, so that makes more sense. If you want to do it, he'll probably have you working mornings or afternoon. Caroline and I cover nights. Wouldn't you want nights off too? Isn't that when Bri is off too? Rees asked, finishing off his drink. Sometimes. He does work evenings a couple times a week, but I'd love to be home during the day. Our poor apartment is starting to fall apart with neglect. A lot of things that need to be done he can't do by himself. We really need 4 hands, and I've never had the energy. Plus, then we could still spend more time together when actually both awake, she said dryly, and glanced at Jessie and Rye. My boyfriend, she explained. Jessie's heart had done a little hiccup at the name, but the time, and the fact that Cavern Hall contained 2 Bryans, had dulled the sensation, so she was able to put on a smile. Ah, I'd guessed as much. He works at the jail, cleaning and delivering food and the like, she said fondly. It pays well and is reliable, steady work. Jessie studied her, wondering if this boyfriend, this Bry, would allow them to question him, assuming Kira was guessing about their purpose in supporting it, as she appeared to. She also pondered the best way to possibly broach the subject with her. Do you come here often, Colonel? Rye asked Rees politely. I try and pop over during my lunch, and sometimes in the evenings to chat with the soldiers, get an idea of their states of mind and all. And chat with Kira, of course, he said easily. He's definitely a regular, Kira said, from where she was wiping down a section of the bar on his far side. Want anything else, Colonel? No, thank you. Just put it on my tab. Already done. The man slid off his stool. It was nice to meet you both. I'm sorry, I never caught your names. Jessica and Ryan, Rye said, indicating who was who. He offered his hand. Pleasure. Same, sir, Jessie said, although taking his hand gave her goosebumps. A moment later, he strode out the door. Kira let out a breath. You're more than welcome to politely dodge his questions instead of answering, especially if you do end up working here, because he'll be persistent and consistent. He's in charge of Greensward, but especially the jail. She jerked her thumb towards the squat building Jessie had scouted earlier, thus in charge of all interrogations of prisoners. He seems to think all civilians are fair game, whether reasonable or not. He knows not to try that shit on me, though. Jessie could imagine. Kira seemed capable of having a very sharp tongue if she wanted. Thanks for the heads up, and the warning. Of course, she snagged Reese's dirty glass and scrubbed the bar. I have a question for you, Rye said now, completely unrelated. Kira raised an eyebrow curiously. Okay. Why blue parrots? She laughed. Reportedly, the original owner had a pair of blue parrots imported from somewhere south. He apparently bred them and they lived here, which was quite a draw since who's actually seen a parrot before? This was our grandparents' time. When Jacob's father bought the place after the original owner died and the parrots were already long gone, he kept the name because of the local history and the fact it was a successful business. He figured it wouldn't be smart to screw with something that had worked. Makes sense. Do you get asked about it a lot? Not as often as you might think. Kira, one of the group at the other end called. She shot them a smile and trotted off. A little strange, Rye muttered. Jessie had to agree. A little, but could also be interpreted as one woman giving others advice. I don't like the phrase interrogation of prisoners, though. Considering how Jez and Jay were caught, I know it's likely, but he gives me the creeps, and he doesn't have any power over me, she said. I know. I wish we didn't need to wait as long as we do to do the boom job properly. I want them out of there, but rescuing them first would put them on too high of an alert. She nodded. Did your heart leap when he said Bry too? Rye shoveled down her last bite and swallowed. Yeah, it startled me, but it's a common enough nickname for an equally common name. Plus, our Bry would never have been caught dead doing menial work at a 3 prison. She had to smile. True enough. Come on, she said, piling the appropriate coin on the bar. Let's go explore Greensward. Ren stretched out on his bed and watched Annie. She idly flipped through a book of wedding dress sketches as she sat by his window. I don't think they realize I don't care. I don't think they do, he agreed. If they wanted us to get married that quickly, isn't it a little late to start from scratch anyway? I would think so. Maybe they have them all made and almost my size. He snorted. That must be. She slammed the book shut and threw it at him. You pick. What? You pick the dress. I don't care. Maybe you do. You're going to get a better view of me in it than I'm going to get of myself anyway. He glanced down at the book. Seriously? I trust your opinion on these matters, Rennie, she said loftily. That was secretly gratifying. He flipped open the book before a thought occurred to him. Does that mean you picked my outfit? No, sadly. My vote would have been for the one with the least clothes. Oh, for the sake of the gods, Annie, he groaned. Now I'm very glad you didn't. She grinned. And I know you wouldn't dream of doing such a thing to me. Although I don't think any of those dresses are even close to scandalous. I'm sure they were all vetted by at least one of my brothers before they got to me. He wrinkled his nose. Something about that thought gives me the creeps, he said, turning a few pages. I now officially have no respect for your brother's taste. Most of these are hideous, and the rest are still ugly. I know, she said, leaning back and putting her feet up on his windowsill. That's why it doesn't matter. Except now I'm screwed either way, too, because no matter what, I have to pick an ugly one. He kept flipping, hoping to find at least one that wasn't. She smirked. Exactly. That doesn't seem fair. Better you than me. He turned it again and then paused, tilting his head. What about this one? Which one? The one on the, he checked, second to last page. It's way better than the others. Oh, I got bored and didn't look that far. He lowered the book to stare at her. That should not still surprise me as much as it does, he said, and shut the book and tossed it back. Look at it. I think it's the one, if you have to pick something out of the book. She fielded it and flipped to the back, studying it. You're right, it is. We'll go for it. She casually dropped the book onto the table and slid out of the chair to flop in the bed, nestling in beside him. Glad that's over with. He crossed his arms behind his head. That's all the decision we get to make, right? I think so, unless Sorin convinces Vlad otherwise. He hummed in response. Although he felt no qualms about loving Annie or even really marrying her, the reason behind the expedited marriage and the fact that they were even getting married while he was still officially a prisoner did rankle him. Yet there was nothing he could do but play along and hope, at some point, things would change. He glanced down at the top of Annie's head. They both knew their relationship could never last. She was one of the three, and that would never change. If, somehow, she ended up in his position, he couldn't do that to anyone. He didn't know what he'd do when the freedom fighters and his brother finally made their move. How could he? He wanted Vladimir captured or dead. Sorin, too, if he pushed back his initial reluctance, because no matter how good of a man he'd slowly become during all this, it didn't change what he had done. Annie, though. Annie had nothing to do with the planning or execution. At every step of the way, she'd been dragged along behind her brothers because she had nothing and no one else. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "About stuff." "Now I feel fully informed," she said dryly, poking him in the side. "Part of this feels right, but other parts feel horribly wrong," he said finally, trying to get his thoughts in line. "It was barely weeks ago that I realized I had feelings for you, let alone thinking about marrying anyone. I know that if things had gone to plan, I would have been married by now, but marrying Francine for political reasons and marrying you for love and political reasons is so different. The speed and the factors just..." She nodded, curling more tightly into the curves of his body. He slid an arm around her shoulders. "I know. I feel it too, but there's not much either of us can do about it." Once again, here she was, caught as a pawn in her brother's game. And in this one, he couldn't count Sorin out. He'd only survived the attack on Oakbridge because of this very play, and Sorin had been the one to knock him out while Vladimir had attacked his father. "There isn't anything," he corrected softly. "I could try whining, but Sorin just shrugs now and looks guilty, and..." She cut off there. Ren pushed himself up to look down at her. "What?" "Nothing," she said, staring avidly at the ceiling to avoid his gaze. "Annie, what is it? If it's important, I need you to tell me." "Did you know you have a particular tone of voice that is extra hard to resist?" she asked. "Annie." She rolled her eyes, but finally met his gaze. "I was going to say that Vlad is too stressed these days, and I'm not sure he'll react at all well to whining, even whining with a real purpose." Ren knew that stressed was not her first word choice, but he didn't comment on it. They both knew what she meant, and he was pretty sure it worried her too, and Sorin for that matter. Sorin said they're under a lot of pressure, and that he at least expects an attack this spring, any time after the snow melts. "How do you know that?" she asked, eyeing him. "I can never get anything concrete out of Sorin regarding the freedom fighters and their chances." "I use that tone of voice you can't resist. I can be very persuasive." She tried very hard not to giggle and failed. "Yeah, but it's Sorin. Somehow I can't picture you using that voice on him, and certainly not having it actually work." He grinned. "To be honest, he volunteered most of it. I think as a heads up. Plus, I'm good at reading people, even Sorin now, and I can usually get a bit out of him. Then I can use that to dig for a little more. He can be a bit of a sucker if you get him talking." She shook her head. "You're right, you do have Sorin read." "Told you." She poked him in the side, then rolled off the bed. "Come on, no use dwelling on it. Let's play chess or something." He snorted, but did as ordered.